You know perfectly well the answer that I'm going to give you, Emily. Why go back to somebody who decided to dump you like an old sock? What is wrong with you? Carol, I know, but I'm attracted to him. Can you understand that? And your husband in all this, have you thought about him? The poor guy did everything to put you to the pedestal where you're standing right now. He gave you the love and the attention you needed, wholeheartedly, despite your past. What past are you talking about? Doesn't he have a past too? His past didn't end up with the birth of a child, let me remind you. Okay, you have a point. I think I'll try to follow your advice and find a distraction to avoid seeing Nicholas again. That's well said. Start by blocking his number everywhere, ma'am. Okay, boss. After this discussion, I went home with the firm conviction of reconnecting with my husband and forgetting the faux pas that I made with Nicholas. For the first few weeks, it was not easy at all, but I held on. I started having activities outside the house with my husband. We went out to the park. We had candlelit dinners, and we also went to the movies when we could. I started to give him more and more attention, and he couldn't understand why this sudden change. I admit that at one point, our couple fell under the weight of the routine. He and I were so absorbed with work that we had forgotten those little signs of attention that often spice up things in relationships. After a few weeks, everything was better in my head. I no longer thought of Nicholas, and I started to take an interest in what was essential to me, that is, my husband and my son. So one day while I was at the office, I received a call from the reception letting me know that there was a man who was looking for me. It was not surprising since my job involved interacting with people on frequent basis. I immediately went to the reception to find out who it was. And to my surprise, standing in front of me was Nicholas. My heart jumped in my chest. Why now? What does he want from me? Could it be fate telling me something? I asked myself all those questions while I walked timidly towards him. Once in front of him, he asked me this question. Why? Embarrassed, I replied, I had to turn the page of my past. And then I turned my back on him and went straight to my office. Once back in my chair, I took a deep breath. I had to go deep within me to draw the strength to send him packing. In recent weeks, I had invested too much of my time, effort, and emotion in my marriage to fall for a second time. I was in pain for not being able to continue with the one for whom I had affection. But logic imposed on me a choice that I was not going to refuse. A week later, in the parking lot of my job, I saw him again. He was standing in front of my car. Apparently, he was expecting me. As soon as I saw him, he smiled. He looked like a child in front of his favorite dessert. This time, he didn't even give me a chance to say a word. He asked me to start my car and follow his directions. And during the whole trip, apart from the directions he gave me, both of us remained silent. I tried as much as possible not to make eye contact with him, let alone speak to him. I didn't want to rekindle those feelings in me that caused me to put the future of my marriage in jeopardy. I had no intention of jeopardizing my safety again. And while I was thinking about all this, I realized that I recognized the path that we were driving on. When we arrived destination, I realized that I knew exactly where he was taking me to. It was one of the restaurants where he used to take me when we were still in a relationship a few years ago. It also was the place where he invited me for the first time. It was so emotional. I tried not to show how I felt by turning to him and asked him, "Why are you doing this?" "I lost you the first time out of cowardice. Losing you the second time will be out of pure stupidity." "Nicholas, do you realize I have a life now? I have a family." "I know all of that, Emily, but I'm not giving up on you. I've hurt you a lot in the past. I know, but today I am a new man. I want to make it up for all my mistakes. Letting you go was my worst mistake." "Your worst mistake was asking me to kill your child. You lost me the day I saw you with her." Nicholas still didn't know that I had kept the child. I hadn't yet found a good time to tell him that the baby he asked me to abort was still alive and well. I dreaded the reaction of my son, my parents, or my husband if it was necessary to organize a meeting with him after all that had happened. While he was still trying to come up with some sentences to make me stay, I turned my back on him and rushed to my car in order to leave this place and not fall under the weight of temptation. Once inside my vehicle, I drove at a full speed towards my home as if I had just seen a ghost. I rode like my life depended on it. Once at home, I waited for my husband to tell him everything. I couldn't go on like this any longer. I was tired of playing with fire. I had to stop it immediately. My husband got home 2 hours later. I had cooked dinner and sent my son to my parents' house for us to have a quiet evening. It was around that meal that I told him everything. And I also explained to him the appearances that Nicola made at my job site. And his reaction seemed pretty calm to me. He looked at me in the eye and said, "You know, I appreciate your honesty. And I admit that I noticed the change in your behavior during this period, which resulted to the demonstration of exaggerated tenderness afterwards. I knew that all this hid some kind of guilt. But Emily, in this fight I can't help you. You'll have to choose between him and I." I was mortified. He had figured me out. I who told myself that I was very discreet. I felt completely naked and completely ashamed of my actions. I realized how mature Vincent was emotionally because, despite all my secretiveness, he managed to detect what was happening below the acting game that I was playing. But despite everything, he managed to keep his calm towards everything. By telling me that I had to choose between Nicholas and him, he gave me the freedom to choose my destiny. But this freedom had an extremely heavy weight on my shoulders. I almost cried, but I had to hold back my tears. We finished our dinner in complete silence. I watched him eat with a face that exuded serenity, and it tortured me. I wish he had gotten angry, even just a little bit. It would have given me at least the feeling that he was forcing me to stay with him. The choice would have been even easier. No, he left me there, abandoned me to my conscience. In the end, the next morning I called Nicholas and told him that we needed to meet, but in a public restaurant. I wanted to talk to him. He gladly accepted, and later that day we met at the restaurant Saint-Tropez in the city center. I didn't go through 4 ways to tell him I didn't want to see him ever again. I had too much to lose by risking my marriage a second time. I also almost told him about our son, but I held back. I didn't want to risk keeping him around. I hope that one day my son will forgive me, but the presence of his father was harmful to my well-being and that of my marriage. I left the restaurant and headed to my husband's job, where once I arrived in the office, I rushed to my knees and humbly asked him for forgiveness for what I've done. He lifted me up and forgave me. Our marriage continued to move on after all these pitfalls, and my husband never alluded to this story again. For my part, sometime later, I learned that Nicholas had been dumped by his wife a few weeks before him and I met at the mall. I understood that he needed a crutch to wipe his tears after his breakup, which is why he pressured me to come back into a relationship with him. A narcissist will always remain a narcissist.